question for you all. How is it August already? Is anybody, yes. Is anybody wondering that? This summer seems to have gotten by so fast, different than the last few. And you know, I was thinking about that over the weekend, how it's the beginning of August. Because I was remembering that it was exactly 8 years ago that my father died. Isn't it funny how those anniversaries really stick with you for so much longer than you thought? Now, I was living in Hawaii at the time on Oahu, but on the day that he died, we were actually on a short trip to Kona on the Big Island. And so I was standing soaking wet in my bathing suit on the beach when my mom called to tell me that my dad died, which was just totally surreal. Though I'm not sure actually what one could be doing that would make receiving that kind of news not rather uncanny, right? But even more strange than the setting was the fact that we had this 6-month-old baby with us, right? Maybe you've seen the 8-year-old version of him bouncing around here. He's the one with the long blonde hair. You see, right around the time that Oliver was born, my dad's cancer had advanced to the point that he chose to discontinue his treatment. And so the first months of Oliver's life were the last months of my dad's life. And what I remember of that year was feeling like my heart just could not stretch any further. Because I was trying to hold on to this totally new, joyful, and disruptive, explosion of possibility in our family, while also holding the pending grief of this profound ending. And trying to do both those things at once was so humbling, and at times so discordant. Which means I have no trouble imagining and really entering fully into this scene that we just heard Chris, bless her soul, sorry for all the names, read from 1st Esdras. Now, I do have some news for us this morning, speaking of endings. Today will be the last installation in our series on the Apocrypha. And maybe some of you will be sad about that, and maybe others have been thinking, what's she doing up there, and when will this possibly come to an end? Well, it's now. Both of those are fine reactions, right? I do want to thank you for indulging me in this little sermonic escapade. It's important for me as a preacher to get to explore new territory and get to explore new sources of wisdom to keep my interpretive skills sharp. Think about the fact that in a lifetime, a preacher could preach through the entire lectionary text about 12 times, and that is a lot of sermons about the prodigal son. Really easy to get stale there. So my thanks are with you for allowing us to go on sort of off-roading here, and we are bringing this to a close. That is not to say there are not more apocryphal books we could consider. We could go on for a long time. There's 2nd Maccabees, 3rd Maccabees, 4th Maccabees. There's the prayer of Manasseh, the wisdom of Sirach. There's even 151st Psalm. But all those things are even more tangential. I think we've sort of gotten the point here, especially now that we all know that the Apocrypha are books that fit historically in the Old Testament, but that were written in Greek and not Hebrew. And thus their, everybody say, canonicity is disputed. I love that. Okay, I can just end my career right here. I've done all I can do. And so here's the last stop, which is the book of Esdras. And in a way, it's the perfect book for this occasion because Esdras really functions as a link from the Apocrypha back into the canonical scriptures. And that's because almost all of the material in Esdras is just retelling the same material that happens in other Old Testament books like Ezra, 2nd Chronicles, and Nehemiah. So other than one independent and delightful little episode right at the beginning of the book about 3 bodyguards who argue about what is the strongest thing in the world, kings, wine, or women, other than that, all the events described in the book of Esdras are also repeated other places in the Bible, which means the big question with the book of Esdras is why? What do we even need this for? What's its purpose? Now, the author clearly knew about the other books, the book of Ezra, what he used as a source. Why just repeat all that material again? And the answer is we really actually don't know the answer to that. Maybe there were some additional parts of the book that are missing now that would make the retelling make more sense, but the answer to this question just may be lost. So we've got Esdras, which is actually really just the Greek word for Ezra. Now, I think we've talked about Ezra recently, haven't we? This is from the time just after the Israelites were exiled in Babylon, right? You all know the Bob Marley song, By the Rivers of Babylon. So they're all in exile, and eventually a new emperor comes to power who feels like he has better things to do than keep a bunch of exiles around. So he allows the Israelites to return home and start to rebuild their lives. So many of them go to do that. Many of them don't, but many do. And those who go find that even though this is what they've been hoping for and waiting for all this time, it is not all rainbows and unicorns back in Jerusalem, if you know what I mean. Maybe you remember the people had been in exile for 50 years. That's a long time. And it means that almost all of what they knew, almost all of what they had built, the institutions, the authority structures, the systems of power, the actual structures, those things were all in ruins when they got back. And it was very hard to start over. There were difficulties and misunderstandings and disagreements about what could and should be rebuilt. There were setbacks and delays. And all of these happenings since the time of the return to Babylon are recorded in the books of Ezra and Nehemiah and in the apocryphal book of Esdras. And part of the story captured in those books is the rebuilding of the temple and its eventual rededication. And the story we heard today was about when the first foundation stones were being placed in that temple, the first new foundation stones. And this poignant, kind of bittersweet scene in which everyone gathers around, right? There's the priests and the priest assistants and the Levites and the people, and they're all watching and praying while the first new stones of the foundation are being placed. And they're blasting trumpets and shouting with joy and giving thanks to God for being allowed to return and to rebuild. But amid this celebratory tumult, right, there is also weeping. Because the elders old enough to know the old temple, upon seeing the new stones put in place, fall to their knees in mourning for all that had been lost. And they cry out to God. They cry for all that has happened. And they cry for the heartache and the sadness that can't be undone. And they cry and they cry. And there are mourners then beside the revelers. And the sound of the trumpets, we are told, cannot be distinguished from the cries. And I have to say, I feel that scene on such a deep level every time I read it. Because it affirms for me that to live in this world is to have to withstand some real ambiguity. And I feel that so deeply again in these days. Everything around me seems so paradoxical. Like lately, I find myself worried about what our son Zachary is going to eat for lunch when he goes to kindergarten. I don't know why I'm fixated upon this. Jason just keeps saying he's going to eat lunch. And I'm like, what's he going to eat? How's he going to work that out? I'm thinking about that. And then I'm seeing these images come through my news feed of the children in Gaza starving, right? Like begging for a morsel. I'm listening to my kids singing an Elmo song together in their room yesterday at the same time that I'm reading about the end of the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, where it's like so hard to hold it all together. And people ask how I am, and I want to say, I'm great, and also terrible. And I'm fine, but not. But I'm happy, but I'm a little devastated. You know, it's like hard to stretch our hearts that far right now. But I want to say that the more I lean into the mystery of faith, the more I understand it now as a mystery. The more I see that part of the most important spiritual work we can do is actually learning to tolerate ambiguity. To hold different things in our hearts and to see that our hearts don't necessarily break, they stretch and grow. And I really think that actually is sacred work. And I think it's a discipline that we lean into, especially in difficult times. Now, the world would prefer, and sometimes our brains would prefer, and certainly some subparts of the church would prefer that we see things in black and white. But I think the ability to tolerate ambiguity, to understand that things may have more than one meaning, to acknowledge that multiple things can be true at once, to open our hearts to questions that may not have answers, those habits can lead us in a profound and mystical and meaningful direction. And I think this works both on sort of a global level and really on an intensely personal level, right? We could say that the world is cruel and harsh, but also that it is filled with potential and compassion and beauty. We could say that people in our families are beloved, and also that they can be very difficult. We can feel strong and uncertain at the same time. We can feel vulnerable and courageous. God can be ever present and feel absent. Right? This kind of ambiguous thinking, I think, is a habit, a difficult one, but one that can assure that our hearts stay open and flexible, able to stretch and take in this big, beautiful world and this gift of life that God has given us. Now, if I take any wisdom away from Esdras for these days, it's something like this. If we take the long view, we will see that what has been destroyed can be rebuilt in time. Not everything. Some things are lost to the past, but much can and much will be made new. There will be grief in that work, yes, for those whose task is remembrance. But there will also be newness of life for those who can find the ability to hope for it. And the most important things we can do as we stand in the gap between now and then is to hold fast to God, and I think to hold fast to community. To hold on to the promise that love will have the last word because it was the first word. And to hold on to the place where that word is given life in every time. To hold on to and lean into the place where grieving elders and hopeful youth meet, where visionaries put new twists on old wisdom, and where for some reason we keep retelling the story again and again and again as it spirals around us, taking us deeper into the mystery of the sacred. Looking back now, I can see that when I lost my dad, in the moment I was trying to figure out how to be a mom, it really was community that kept me afloat. Spiritual community, in which others' joy met with my sadness, others' hope with my despair, others' wisdom with my inexperience. And somehow all those things wove into a blanket that kept my heart warm and supple when sadness threatened to make it brittle and cold. Community also kept my faith well when it was beleaguered, and I cling to that hard-won truth now. I want to lean into that experience of being together, even as we are different. And as we come to the end of the Apocrypha, I mean, there are questions without answers here. Is it in? Is it out? I guess from now on, the choice is up to you. I'm glad we could spend this time giving these voices their due, even if it just helped us to understand that they too did the best they could to make meaning of their own times as part of God's time. And all these stories have been a reminder to me that it is God's time. We breathe in that assurance when we worship, but we really could do it all the time, right? It is God's time. We try to hold that hard and wondrous truth that this very moment is God's time, and that it is in God's hands. Our good times, our tough times, our certain times, our worried times, our new exploration times, and thinking about the old times. God is with us in all of them, and we are never alone. So I want to offer those words in the name of the God that created, redeemed, and sustained us always. Amen.